What's up, everybody? Welcome to a new edition of Truth Seeking Thursday with myself and Jay Young here. Welcome to the show. Tonight, we're having a discussion on demographics and what is demographics? What does it mean for the future? And it's a really interesting topic. I think Jay, you presented this one to me, and I did some digging into different aspects of this, and it's actually a really broad topic, and there's a lot of implications of it, and a lot of stuff that's happening with our demographics now and where we sit in this time. And so I guess let's start off by Jay. What's been going on with you? It's been a couple weeks, or at least a week, since folks have heard what you're up to. How's everything going on your end?
Life's good. I just got into pickleball. I played a couple times this past week, and it's been good. It's like a hybrid of tennis, ping pong, and badminton. So it's been enjoyable. And I used to play tennis as a kid, so that was nice to kind of get back into something. It's definitely a lower intensity version of tennis, so I like it. But I'm having to adjust because the way that we play, the mechanics of playing pickleball and the way that we swing the racket, the paddle is different from tennis, and I keep reverting back to tennis. So it's been a challenge to get out of that. But I'm definitely enjoying it, and I'll probably join one of the pickleball clubs in Huntsville. I had no idea it was so popular.
Where did the pickleball thing come from, man? It seems like it was like one day everybody's all into pickleball.
Yeah, exactly. I had no idea that it was this popular. And then my parents started to play it when they moved here, and they're into it. It's like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then my friend Giselle contacted me a couple weeks ago. Hey, we're gonna get together. Why don't you come out with us? We're gonna play. There was a new place open up right next to Gigaparts, in fact, called the Pickler. And I went, and there's a group of people, so we all hang out together, and there's about 30 of us, and this was the grand opening to the public, and there was probably 150, 200 people there for the grand opening.
Wow.
It was. In this place is huge. If I had to guess, their footprint is probably as big as the Gigaparts footprint. I think they have 11 or 12 courts.
Is it indoors?
Yeah, indoors. Nice facility. Really, really good place. If anyone's interested, check out the Pickler. And their staff was really nice, very helpful, very, very good facility, very clean, nice layout, and it was good. Definitely enjoyed it.
Seems like there's a lot more of these like curling. My buddy at work is getting into curling. He's going to join the curling club.
Man, that I've seen how they have to like move the brush. I don't know what you call it, in front of the stone, whatever it is. That seems intense, man. It really seems intense.
It sounds like a fun little social thing that involves a lot of drinking, I hear. So.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. So. Yep.
So drinking and ice capades event type thing. So
what about you? Anything that we do?
So it's been kind of just self-reflection time for me. I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been still working on this book right here, but I've kind of been laying out some plans for the future, kind of organizing my thoughts and kind of getting some stuff together to make some plans. And so yeah, it's been kind of chill. Got just getting some stuff kind of resituated and reorganized, and just kind of thinking about the future and some of my projects and getting a little bit more organized with that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So, so yeah, that's what I've been up to lately. If you've been, on the channel, it's primarily been Jay and I doing the live streams here, as far as activity on the channel, and been working on a strategy to get guests booked and also showcase projects that I have in the books, and some projects that have already been worked on. So making some more plans for the channel, going to be ramping some things up soon. So so that's kind of been part of everything. But yeah, getting into tonight's topic, man.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad we're covering this. I think this is important, and I really appreciate how you've gone into the deep end on this. I think you brought up some factors that I had not thought of, which is good, right? That means we're complementing each other. And yeah, you're right. This is a difficult topic. I've been getting into the at least the high level view study of demographics for about 5 years now, and it's been fascinating. And I've heard, as a kid, we hear about demographics, and I'd always heard about it from the point of view of, let's say, the stock market, because people's risk tolerances change as they get older, right? Or they change, move into different economic zones and social economic zones, I should say. And so that was about as far as it went for me. But as I got more into this topic, I started to realize, wow, this affects a lot of different aspects of our lives. And predictions and forecasts are not perfect, but they can be pretty fairly accurate. And with that accuracy comes a decent ability to forecast second and third order knock-on effects. So for example, as people move in from a non-producer into a producer group, or from a producer group into a non-producer group, i.e. they retire, there are certain things that can be said about that, and so I think that most people aren't aware of how this can move. They don't consider the trends that can develop because of that. Although I do think that the topic is approachable by pretty much anyone. It's just that these trends could take decades and multiple generations to unfold, and so we just don't see it. And so I appreciate the work that a lot of demographers have done over the decades to kind of put this data together and keep track of something that's kind of dry on the surface, but then they're able to create very good narratives around this. And I think that they can actually be some of the first ones to sound the clarion call that there could be some problems. And I think, in our discussions, Greg, in the past couple weeks trying to get the topic together, I think we started to realize, yeah, some stuff's bad. We've got problems coming up, and these are the sorts of things that take decades to develop, and they take decades to unwind. And there are no quick cures for this, because you can't make 30-year-olds. You can't make people who you just plug into a work environment, in order to make the economy go up. You got to start with 0-year-olds, and then it takes 30 years to develop a 30-year-old. I know that sounds like obvious, but I think most people just kind of assume at a subconscious level, you can just plug a 30-year-old in, and that's just not the case. You can't create a 30-year-old, And then so Greg, for the audience, Greg and I started looking at what are some of the contributing factors for our demographic trends. And then we've tried to look at some second and third order knock-on effects. And it's a little scary, especially, considering, Greg and I have been talking about AI and robotics, the past couple episodes. And I think this is AI robotics are probably going to be, and I'll say energy, unlocking energy through nuclear are probably going to be the top three. Um, and I'll add one more thing: longevity. Probably be the top four factors for affecting demographics in a way that we haven't foreseen in a long time.
So if folks out there listening, you're like demographic, what'd you just call me? What we're talking about here is from the Webster's dictionary. We're talking about statistical characteristics of human populations, such as age or income, used especially to identify markets, is one way. And then in business, a market or segment of the population identified by demographics. And I think we're kind of going with the human population as the kind of the topic of what we're discussing. But then, it also has those implications of a segment of the market. So that's what we're talking about tonight. And when I started to look at this, I was starting to ask a lot of questions because I was wondering, and I've heard the same things. I've heard a lot of things from when I was younger, and now on the internet, looking around at different information as I'm older now, and experiencing in the world about the different numbers of the population. Like when I was younger, it was always like, oh my gosh, we're growing so much. The world is expanding. There's so many more people on the planet. There's, the population versus where it was hundreds of years ago is now exploded. And oh my gosh, there's so many people here.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go and you do some traveling. You kind of travel around, and especially if you travel around the US and you've driven out west, and you just see the vast expanses of land out there that are just uninhabited, it seems.
Right.
That you start to question that whole notion of like, oh my gosh, there's so many people. Well, where are they out here? I don't see them any, but out west, it's you're dealing with environmental factors where a lot of people, that the land just isn't that great to live out there, but there's a lot of land. There's land. Okay.
Right. And to add to your point, that's just the United States.
Yeah.
Right. And as humans, we've gotten very good at taking our immediate environments with us. You take a look at the southwest, the sand states. That's not really habitable, by itself, but we've been able to kind of terraform in a very local level, as we need to. And, to your point, yeah, this land that, when you go out in the Badlands, stuff like that, on the surface doesn't seem like that great, but we can take our environment with us. And then you take Russia. Granted, there's huge parts of Russia that are frozen, but it's doable. There are people who live above the Arctic Circle, and Russia, I think, is the biggest country by landmass. So United States, Russia, India, China. China's a decent sized country. Yeah, we're the people. It can't be that crowded.
Yeah, so that got me wondering, like, okay, well, how do we know what we know, right? How do these people that are collecting this data, how are they confident in the data? And to me, looking into it, it could still be up in the air, because there's there's also factors into governments collecting population data. So one of the things that, if we look into just kind of a cursory search of how that data gets collected in population statistics that they can come from every a census conducted every 10 years, surveys between census agencies, current population survey of income and program participation, administrative records. You have births and deaths and migration data from the different government agencies, the Social Security Administration, the IRS, Department of Homeland Security. Supposedly, all these go into estimates and projections. And then you have international sources like the United Nations, Eurostat, and Census Bureau, international programs. I'm sure that, different programs for different governments and their populations on how they're collecting this data. And, I just asked myself, like, you probably almost get a more accurate reading now in our modern society by figuring out how many people have a cell phone and looking at how many cell phones exist, because it's almost like about every person has a cell phone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just kind of questioning where do these numbers come from, and is there how do we trust those numbers as well? So
Yeah, that's a really good point. I had not considered that until you brought it up earlier. We were prepping for the show, and to add to the problem, to compound this, with countries such as the United Kingdom, Canada, U.S., some of these other first world nations, they have probably some fairly sophisticated methods, sophisticated tools for gathering this information. But there are huge swaths of the planet which they've got challenges for collecting this data. So we're talking about Saharan and sub-Saharan Africa, right? Which is 2 or 3 dozen countries, and large parts of Latin America where they have difficulty actually getting to some remote and far-flung locations. And any one location by itself probably not that many people, but taken in totality, it's a lot. And so some of these countries, they don't have either the finances to be able to engage in these active practices the way the United States does, or it's difficult for them to track this sort of thing on a consistent basis. They don't have the administrative overhead to track this sort of thing, to have dedicated personnel to do it. So I think that adds to the difficulty. I had not thought about the cell phone solution. I think that's if you just need a good de facto solution, it's probably pretty decent.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, because another question I asked myself was, would there be a reason for governments to inflate their population numbers? And in current events now that we have that are currently going on, this news about these folks in the Somalians in Minnesota,
yeah,
and the fraud that's gone on with all these daycare centers and that kind of stuff. They could say they have a daycare center with X amount of children in it, which receives this much funding. So they're kind of like, in order to get more funding, kind of obliged to, say that there are way more people here in order to pull in those funds. So with a lot of government programs and states in the federal government, you're almost incentivized to lie to a certain extent, right, about your population numbers, because funding is based, especially with our welfare state, that you get some more funds based on your population numbers. So, our global population numbers can we trust global population numbers to an extent, or are we kind of like, I think we also have to kind of take into consideration our lived experience, right? And see and kind of look around us at our local areas and see what we're perceiving in our localities as well as far as population. I know for around here, you know, over the course of the years, the traffic and stuff has gotten a lot heavier and all that around this area in particular. But but yeah, I think there's a combination of factors that we have to consider here when we're looking at what is the true population.
Um,
Is the real population more or less than
yeah,
what we're thinking?
yeah. Those are absolutely good points. And I think you bring up a good point around incentives um, to juke the numbers. And this gets into gamification, right? Is there an incentive for gamification? And I can tell you, while I don't know what the motivations are, well, I cannot state with great certainty what the motivations are, but there is huge controversy around China. China and India's numbers officially have gained parity, about 1.4 billion people, um, and now there are more and more indirect estimates saying that China's population is far, far below 1.4 billion people. It's closer to 500 million to 800 million people, and right off the bat, there's always that first reaction, like, how could he get, how could he get that wrong? You know, um, and for anyone who's interested, I can probably provide a series of videos that look at different methodologies. For example, I know this is going to sound funny, but salt consumption, soy sauce consumption, electricity consumption, the lights at night, the amount of luminosity of cities and rural areas, things like that.
I
Vaccine usage,
Yeah,
right?
I did see that as part of one of the data collection methods was to look at not you can kind of like look at the amount of lights in a certain area and just kind of make an estimate, yeah,
Yep. And
via
so,
satellites.
yeah, and so any one method, because it's indirect, no method's going to have high levels of accuracy, but taken in totality, they can start to converge pretty well. And some of these demographics, um, um, I'll say scholars, are starting to converge into a rough range of 500 to 800 million people. And so then one would ask, okay, well, why would China want to, the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, why would they want to juke the numbers? And part of it is marketing. Is they can say we have the largest population on the planet, we have the greatest workforce on the planet, and we can handle any work that you have, right? So send it over to us, to China, and we can take care of it. So right off the bat, that's a huge aspect. From a political point of view, from a geopolitical point of view, there's the aspect of being able to say we also have the biggest military in the world, right? So we can project power into a whole slew of places that no other country can do because we just have more people, we have more equipment, and we can make equipment. We have the supply and logistics capabilities because we have 1.4 billion people. Well, if they only have some 3/4 of a billion people, that's literally a 50% reduction. That's huge. That's a huge problem there for China, you know. And we're starting to see some of the difficulties come out in China. And I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but there are certain movements called lie down flat and let it rot. And these are people that they've just given up. They're burnt out, and I think that the CCP has fostered an environment of extreme work hours for not just the high performers who love that sort of thing, but for everyone. They call it 996. Work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. That's a lot. That's 72 hours a week, and most people are going to burn out, with that sort of thing, especially if they have families they got to take care of. and a lot of people, they're just giving up, and they're just lying down flat, and they just want to let it rot. They're done. And so with that many people extracting themselves from the workforce, by definition, they go from a pool of let's say 750 million people to maybe 500 million people who are available to work. That's a problem. That's a problem. These are non-producers.
Alexander brought in this question and asked what prompted this discussion on population counts. And Jay brought this topic up to me, and this was something that's kind of leading in from our discussions on AI. And I think it is important for the changes that'll come in the future, looking at what the current population numbers are doing and what the trend is towards that, and those implications on the future, so that we can kind of adapt and figure out what's what we have in stake for the future to make our plans and make adjustments accordingly.
Yeah it's there's always that fine line, right, between yes, a person can be knowledgeable about something, but how much can they make of an impact on it? So we as individuals, I don't think we can make much of an impact on it, but being informed, hopefully well informed, allows us to understand what these trends are and forecasts fairly well, and then make plans for that. Whether that be moving to a completely different country or changes to one's financial portfolio, maybe instead of getting into investment properties, maybe getting out of investment properties, or at least being aware that that's a possibility. These sorts of things can make a difference. And changes to one's portfolio may be, well, because there's going to be so many people into bonds. Maybe I want to purchase bonds because I feel that the price of bonds will go up because of the demand, or not. There may be also the possibility of being able to invest in particular countries, because India right now has about 1.4 billion people, and they have the youngest population of the planet, I believe. So more and more companies are starting to invest in India because of that vibrant workforce, and there may be a really a positive explosion of manufacturing power in India. So if that's important to someone, they can start to maneuver their portfolio over to places like Iran and India.
And it also is a factor in the whole existence of peoples, like, and their continuation into the future, because if you're not meeting a certain replacement rate, right, like those peoples could end up just being gone from the planet at a certain point. So
Right.
or your society just tends to crumble. So it's just kind of interesting to see where the things are going, and figure out are there any potential solutions for that, and ways that you're going to have to adapt to what is. And I guess like using what data we have available now, we can if we say that we can trust some of this data, then you can kind of see, and from what I've been seeing in this is that a lot of the Western countries are not being able to keep up with the replacement rate of new births for the current population.
Yeah.
From what I've been looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? Is to be able to provide some reasonable interpretation of this sort of thing. Should we go into just some of the basics of the population pyramid?
Yeah, the global pyramid. Is that what
So
you
yeah,
want to
let's
bring up?
before we do that, let's go into here, let's do this one. I'm going to put a the very last chat I put in there, private chat.
Yep. You want me to bring that one up?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
All right.
You know what? No, not that one. I'm sorry, that's not a good one.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go to the World Economic Forum one.
All right. Gotcha.
And so this is to give some context for the audience. And when we talk about demographics, so let's scroll down just a little bit, and right there. So in the upper right-hand corner, where it says expansive, constrictive, and stationary, these are basically basic three types of shapes, geometries, if you will. And when you have what they call expansive, this is kind of your typical, your normal curve, if you will. And that's where you have a broad base, and at the top it's pointed. If we could scroll down just a little bit, I want to explain the graph. So the one that says China and India in there, the x-axis, the horizontal axis, is basically the number of people on, typically, not with this graph, but typically on one side is going to be male, the other side is going to be female, okay? And then your vertical, your y-axis is going to be your age groups. It could be bracketed by 5 years or 10 years, and some of the very detailed graphs are every single year of age in there, and you'll have some sort of curve in there. So that's kind of your basic graph. If you scroll back up just a little bit, yep, right there. And so we have a normal curve that you quote unquote want is your expansive curve, where the base is broad. That's where you have the most number of people, and these are your babies. They're being born, and then every year some of the people drop out of that, unfortunately, whether it be through natural causes or unnatural causes. And every year when they move to the next age bracket, there are a few left, and typically it'll go up to about 100, and at that point it's a sharp edge. The next one is constrictive, and that is where there are fewer people being born than there are that are already in a particular age bracket. And so we saw this with China, and if you look down and you see the China-India graph, we see the individuals who are roughly in the 30 to 60 range. They make up, not only do they make up the bulk of the population, but they're also, each individual age bracket is wider than the base, and that means that they don't have the new people coming in to take up those age brackets, and that is asymmetric, highly asymmetric, and some would say this is a bad thing. This is not something that we want. We always want to have that typical pyramid with a wide base, and the ability for the younger populations to take over the older brackets. And the third one is stationary, and basically your edges are straight, and that's not good either, because by definition, every year there's going to be some people who pass away through natural and unnatural causes, and when they move up, that's going to be fewer people moving up into those brackets as well. And it's not as bad as constrictive, but by definition, you won't have the ability to to have the younger people move into the older age bracket demographics as well. And so there's one more type that's not shown in here, but it's kind of that your typical expansive graph. Instead of a straight line along the edges, it's actually slightly concave. And that means you have extremely high growth. So these would be places like in Saharan and Sub-Saharan Africa, where your replacement rates are in the 3s, 4s, and 5s, where you have the average number of children per female would be maybe 4 or 5, whereas in places like Germany and the United States, it's less than 2 children per female. So, and just for context for the audience, in order for a population to maintain that expansive pyramid, that normal pyramid, you need basically 2.1 newborns per female on average, right? Any more than that, and you'll start to get growth. That's where you get the concave look. Any less than that, and we start to get what China has developed, and they don't have enough people to replace the older people in the higher brackets, age brackets. So if we scroll down a little bit, we've got China and India, and we can see both of these are a little bit skewed, right, towards the higher end. China is a slightly older population. If you just take a mathematical average across the board, we can see that China is definitely an older population, but by way of where the bulge is. As compared to India, the average age there is much younger, right? So they could, in theory, have a more vibrant workforce. If you scroll down to the next graph, USA and Japan, we see the bulk of Japan's population is between 40 and 80. That's not good. So that means that their average is probably somewhere around 60. That's literally twice as old as India's population. And that means, by definition, those are people who are either retired and won't be re-entering the workforce, or they have people who are retirement age, but they got to continue to work because they can't afford to retire. And so they may not have the energy, the ability to continue to work, but they just have to keep trying to, right? And so they put huge stresses on the body. United States on the left-hand side is those edges are kind of straight up and down. So we have a little bit of a unique situation here. If you scroll down one more graph, we take a look at Africa versus Europe. Now, Africa's a very interesting situation because they're rapidly growing population. They are that concave graph I was talking about before, and you can see that their average age is definitely far below that 30 that India had. So they're rapidly growing, but conversely, unfortunately, Africa also has high levels of mortality, right? So by the time they get into their 60s and 70s and 80s, not many people have survived, okay? And then we can see with Europe, and taken in totality of the European Union, there's that straight edge, right, from about 37 up to about 60. And that is just this huge movement. Every year there's getting older and older, and they're going to have problems supporting those retirees. Or if they want to support themselves, they have to get back into the workforce. And what does that mean? That means they are not vacating jobs that the younger generations were assuming that they were going to get. So you may have older generations that are staying in, let's say, manufacturing jobs or small businesses like plumbing and electrician jobs that the younger generations had assumed they wouldn't be able to get into. And this is significant because they are adding to the supply of labor and thus driving down the price of labor because there's such a huge supply. And that causes problems for the younger generations when they're assuming they can buy a house, start a family, start to build wealth. And the older generation is like, I can't leave. My portfolio is not built up enough, um, and, um, and there aren't enough producers and employers. They kind of have to entice the older people to come back into the workforce or stay in the workforce. So we've got problems. And also, if there are not enough young people in the lower strata, like we see with Europe, from 0 to about 25, there may not be enough people to be productive. So the older people have to come back into the workforce just to maintain their country, not even to get ahead, just to maintain. So we've got problems. We got some real problems, and we don't know exactly how this is going to be solved. I have my suspicions. I have my predictions, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, you think about that. If you have maybe a little bit older if you have an older population, and we currently have this huge price on housing and affordability of housing for a lot of people. And you think about, well, if we have this huge amount of older population and but not enough of a younger or less of a younger population, that if you play that out going into the future, you're gonna have all this glut of buildings and houses and infrastructure that may end up just crumbling because you don't have the population to replace those or even fill the demand for those structures and everything.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We're absolutely seeing this in Japan. I saw a video where a gentleman he acquired a house for literally, I think it was $72. And why would someone do that? Why would anyone sell a house for $72? Is because they just needed to offload it, because the liability of keeping the house was greater than any potential profit. So in a way, he almost could have paid the buyer to take the house, at that point. And the guy who bought it, I think he was literally in his 30s, if I was judging his age correctly. From his point of view, he was like, this is great. This is a vacation home, And I think what he wanted to do was create almost like an Airbnb sort of situation, because it was kind of in a resort town in Japan. And so from his point of view, he was like, I don't have to charge much for this thing. But the point is, what you're talking, Greg, is how did they get to that point? Japan's population is so old. The average age is so old, and they've had such so many people who've had to kind of withdraw that the housing situation is by not because they created housing, but because there's not enough demand for it. They have a glut now of housing, And there's even I should have looked this up before. There's a famous forest in Japan that's known for people for committing suicide. That's some scary stuff right there. The Greg and I we talked about this before going into the show, that there are so many factors going into this that many people feel very demoralized. So it's not a matter of disease. Japan's a first world nation. I used to live there, and very advanced country in terms of hygiene and standards, health standards and technology. They're not dying because necessarily of disease. Many times people are taking their own lives because they just don't have a sense of hope. They don't have a sense of connection. And unfortunately, Japanese people can be a little standoffish, even with each other. And so that they've created a housing glut because of that.
Yeah, and there's just so many different factors for what we're seeing in the population numbers currently in the modern era. It's everything from the male and female dynamic to the birth, the death rate, the various reasons why people are passing, um, kind of our cultural factors, and which are leading to you know some of these numbers. And and looking at it, especially with a lot of the developed countries and the population statistics there, it almost does seem like, when people get a little too comfortable, that or there's all these options towards exploring your individual freedom in life, that you have all these people saying, putting off having children in order to have freedom. They believe that they're getting a lot more freedom to go do all this different stuff in their life, and then getting toward the end there, and not having anything, anybody to continue on after that. So there's a lot of societal, cultural things, and especially I think when it comes to living in comfort, which in a lot of the industrialized countries, first world, so to say, countries, that that's not so much on people's minds as to start settling down and having families.
Yeah.
Because there's all these other options supposedly for you.
Yeah. We're we've gotten ourselves into a predicament. And China's, I hate to keep harping on China. I'm not trying to make fun of them or anything like that, but they're a very unique example. And at one point, they were one of the largest countries by population in the world. Not well, for a while they were, and we all know about the one-child policy in China, then the two-child policy, and recently I think they implemented a three-child policy. This is their attempt at trying to fix a problem, and by cracking the whip, where like they overcompensate on one end, by only allowing one child, and they held that up for too long, and now they're overcompensating on the other end. So, oh, you can have more children now. Well, you have this huge gap, population gap, this demographic gap. You can't make 30-year-olds, and if they want to allow people to have 3, 4, 5 kids, that's fine. But then those are resources that have to be taken from one area and utilized for those kids. That's an issue. And then on top of that, because it's a one child, there's two major factors: one child policy, and on top of that, they were very, I'm going to say, male centric society over there. They were very much into whoever's the firstborn male gets preferential treatment. It was very common for any female that's born is to basically be killed by the parents, as a way of not fulfilling their one child quota, if you will. They still have the slot that's open, and then they can try to have another kid until they have a boy, and now they have a quote unquote glut of males in their society, and it's pretty significant. If the last estimate I saw was somewhere around 30 million, there were 30 million more males than females in China. That's significant. That's 1/10 the population of the United States. And that's the cultural aspect of they value males more than females over there. And so I could see there being a really sticky situation, sticky wicket, if you will, with that sort of asymmetry, where you have so many males possibly competing for so few females. What does that do? And then for the males who are not able to get married, to have a wife, how do they feel? Could you imagine 30 million pissed off men in a country? What are you going to do with them?
Well,
War.
yeah, right. And uh, I read Yeonmi Park's book. She was a factor from North Korea, but she talked about why China actually um, they kind of look the other way on the human trafficking issue with North Korea because because of their population to kind of subdue all these men that don't have any women, that they allow the human trafficking and sex slaves of the North Korean women into China. And so, there's a whole network from what Yeonmi talked about of these guys brokering North Korean women into China for all these guys, basically to quell the male population so that they don't, go ape shit, I think.
Yeah.
Over there.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're kind of harkening back to the idea of the comfort woman, right? That we saw in World War II. Japan used Chinese and Korean women as quote unquote comfort women, and they were used for, I'm trying to be very, dampen the message here, but they used them for comfort, if you will. And then with the Nazis, that the quote unquote joy division, which is basically the same thing, and when government interferes with this sort of thing, when they cause these problems, they're going to create they're going to cause extreme quote unquote solutions to try to quell these populations.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It's kind of an example of central planning. Anytime that you try to do some central planning, it always ends up being a total disaster.
Yeah. So then maybe that's a good time to start looking at causes and factors for why a country would move away from that typical normal pyramid pattern with the clean lines, if you will, those straight sloped lines. And Greg and I were trying to go through this, and I don't know how you feel about this, Greg, but in terms of what I've seen, what little I understand about the topic, the vast majority of this can be traced back to government interference in a whole slew of different ways and factors, and tools and methods that they have at their disposal. That's the majority of the problem right there. It stems from government interference.
Yeah, we're attempting to break this down into different causal factors of what was going on. A lot of it you can trace back to the government and the policies of government, and thinking about how the culture is influenced, and I think even the philosophical underpinnings of the culture with the government. A lot of those policies are kind of started by these philosophical ideas, like of these working groups and think tank groups about population. And you could probably take it back to like Thomas Malthus and what he talked about at a certain point you have like an exponential. He talked about there's like an exponential growth in population, but your ability to produce things was more of a linear path. And so you kind of, if you don't check your population, then you could not have as much resources for the exponential growth consideration in the future. And so, you kind of push those ideas down into the future, and those ideas start to affect the cultures of your societies, and those those ideas kind of get ingrained into people through the social engineering aspects of these ideas permeating society. And then, once your culture and your people start to believe these things, then they're thinking that, oh, I have to save the environment, or I have to save the planet. There's too many people. Like I don't need to worry about that, because these ideas have been put into everybody's heads that we're in a population crisis.
Yeah, I think that to build on what you're saying, I think there are people who, especially in government, who feel that they know best. They have the best access to information. They have the best access to analysis, and they have the best value judgments of anyone on the planet, or at least anyone within their country. And thus, they are uniquely positioned to tell other people how to live their lives. And so they can make value judgments for other people, regardless, right? And I think Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek talked about this. These are Austrian economists, and one of them said that government is incapable of getting all the necessary information, and the other one said, even if they were capable of getting all the information, they don't have the ability to analyze it, with proper standing, with objective analysis, without being corrupted by their human emotions. And I definitely agree with both of them. And so, and we've seen this, right? China is a perfect example of this. They implemented the one-child policy, I think, back in the late 70s, and they put this on, and at that point, the CCP didn't have to do anything. They could just put this law on, and they didn't have to take any active measures. They could just say, well, if the law is the law, you just have to follow the law. And they let that go, quote unquote, too long, and that was a problem. And now they're paying the price for it 50 years later. And it took an active effort to change the law because of the legal and social inertia, that momentum that stayed in place. Why? Because the CCP thought it knew better than the people. And they thought they were better informed and had better analysis and had better values than the people. And they're paying the price for that.
Yeah, I wanted to bring in this reference of the Club of Rome and their publication, The Limits to Growth, and kind of talk about that for a second when we're talking about this. So this was a 1972 report that discussed the possibility of exponential economic and population growth with a finite supply of resources, studied by computer simulation. The study used the World 3 computer model to simulate the consequence of interactions between Earth and human systems. Commissioned by the Club of Rome, the study saw its findings first presented at international gatherings in Moscow and Rio de Janeiro in the summer of 1971. The report's authors, Donella H. Meadows, Dennis L. Meadows, Jorgen Randers, and William W. Behrens III, representing a team of 17 researchers. The model was based on the work of J. Forrester of MIT, as described in his book World Dynamics. The report's findings suggest that in the absence of significant alterations in resource utilization and environmental destruction, it is highly likely that there will be an abrupt and unmanageable decrease in both population and industrial capacity. Although it faced severe criticism and scrutiny upon its release, the report influenced environmental reforms for decades. Subsequent analysis notes the global use of natural resources has been inadequately reformed to alter its expected outcome, yet price predictions based on resource scarcity failed to materialize in the years since its publication. So,
yeah, this is right up there with the population bomb by Paul Ehrlich. I forget what year that came out in the 70s as well. And there was this mania, if you will, in the 70s that we thought that there was going to be, all these problems with quote unquote overpopulation. By the way, that's where the movie Soylent Green with Charlton Heston came out, right? And
I was going to mention that, yeah.
yeah, and so we know about this, right? We know about the movie, and that I think that was the primary catalyst was this, the primary catalyst for the creation of the movie, and but there was no basis, and I think people get lost in math. They love to get into their simulations without any understanding of the underlying factors. They just say, well, the curve is going up exponentially. It'll always go up exponentially. Okay, but what were the causes that got you there? It doesn't matter. Yes, it does matter. That's why you have the graph, right? And then, by the way, if I could take a 15-second detour here, that's the problem that we're seeing with the IPCC, the UN's International Panel for Climate Change, is they have, I think it's 37 or 38 quote unquote models for modeling what they think is going to happen, with the environment. And I think every single one of the models, except for one, have been falsified. But the IPCC refuses to acknowledge that, because they don't look at the factors that cause the models to do that. And we're seeing the same thing with these so-called population explosion, population models. They're just wrong, and they get lost in the math.
Well, I think there is a more nefarious component to this whole thing, because these folks that are coming up with these numbers and putting out this research have a certain philosophical underpinning where there is an elite class of human beings that should exist, and then the rest of us are just fodder. And there's way too many of us just kind of running amok around here that have too many notions going on about wanting to be free and not be controlled and things like that. So these folks, and we can look at like some of the folks like the early eugenicists folks like Francis Galton, and his some of his ideas running into the more modern folks that would be influenced by the early eugenicists. And we can look at like Bill Gates, for instance, with his ideas about vaccinating all these people and vaccination and sterilization campaigns, which was really pretty big component of this book right here that I've been reading, by Zoe Smith, the COVID Code, My Life in the Thrill Kill Medical Cult, is kind of looking at the agenda that rolled out during COVID. And there's just way too many of us, way too many people that can maybe think and not want to go along with the plans that some of these folks think that they are rightful to exert control over the rest of the population.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's cover the Hey Alabama has a couple of comments in here. People who think the world is overpopulated has never flown in a plane and looked out the window. That's what Greg said. For several years, I've heard that the whole population of the world can fit inside one of our smaller states. Yep, 100% true. Yeah, can fit inside of the state of Hawaii. With every person having, X number, like one square meter or something like that of space. The government friends want fewer of us because we'd be easier to control, and they don't want to rub elbows with us booger eaters. No. Yeah, it's a good point you're making, Greg. A lot of this started with the progressive movement, right, in the earliest part of the 20th century, where you had people like I think it was Bertrand Russell and Margaret Sanger, right, and these were pro population control. They were also pro what's it, when you want to get rid of an entire population,
Eugenics, or
Well, eugenics is controlling of the development, but not fratricide. Um, when you, I'll think of the word in it. When you want to get rid of an entire population, so people like Margaret Sanger created the Negro Project, where they wanted to get rid of blacks, in the United States. She also wanted to get rid of, in her words, the morons and the imbeciles, the less than desirables, and I think there's a video out there. I'll see if I can find it. I believe it's Bertrand Russell wanted people to have to justify their own existence, and if you couldn't do that, then you're taken around back and gotten rid of, So that's what the progressive movement is. That's what it's based on. Is that a select few get to tell the rest of the world how they ought to live and think, and they get to impose their value system on everyone else. That's what we're facing.
Yep. And so, it kind of ties into a lot of how our society and our culture are operating, because early on, and specifically if we look into the robber barons of the age in the United States, the Harrimans, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, all of these folks were into eugenics and wanting to round up the undesirables, so they say.
Yeah. I think also the Kellogg family, right? Were they into that? I think that they were part of the Kellogg's and Post. They wanted to get people off of meat. They wanted to eat only grains. If I remember correctly, they had a whole a whole institution that was about getting people off of meats, because they felt that it added to the lustful behavior, and grains were a great way to get people off their quote unquote lustful behavior. So yeah, it's bad. Should we start maybe talking about some of the causes that we've kind of identified?
Yeah.
So right off the bat, one thing that I think we all kind of know about, but it's important to bring up, is basically the difference between industrialized and agrarian societies. Agrarian societies, by necessity, need a lot of kids. They need basically a workforce that's almost free, if you will, where each individual has an output more than their caloric input. So you have a lot of kids. So was not uncommon to have some pretty big families, to have quote unquote free workers who could work the farm, and maybe even expand the farm. And so if even at a young age, maybe 5-6 years old, they could be helpful on the farm. That took a huge load off of the other people, so they could do their work as well. So for years, for decades, these were people who, by their very existence, they were positive producers. They were kind of a multiple effect, if you will. As compared to the industrialized societies and the more information age societies, it may take 20 years, 25 years to get a person where they're actually a positive producer. And I apologize for using such sterile language, but I think it kind of encapsulates it pretty well. So for a person to get through high school, they got it probably 18 before they graduate. And maybe some of these people come out and they start entering the workforce. That's a fraction of the population. People who they get a 4-year degree, so when they graduate, 22, 23, okay? And then the people who go for their advanced degrees, or they go for career-specific degrees, such as medical, right? So by the time they get out, they're getting close to 30 years old before they're actually producers and earning money. So we're talking about a range of 2 to 3 decades before they go from the non-producer to the producer class, if you will. And so that puts a huge financial burden on the parents, and we see parents making that conscious choice. I can't afford to have a kid. I can't afford to go from 2 kids to 3 kids, because every one kid in today's dollars, I think, is $250,000 to get a kid to the age of 18, somewhere like that. That's a lot of money. So to go from, if I've got 2 kids, I know I'm going to spend $500,000, to 3 kids, I know I'm going to spend $750,000. That's a significant situation, and it weighs very heavily on these parents. And so they may only have 1 or 2 kids, and that was a huge factor to go from explosive growth to really diminishing growth.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're primarily agrarian, you can kind of see, firsthand, right? Like the power in more numbers on your farm, because you're just a lone farmer working, these different aspects of your farm on the fields that you're growing, the things that you're producing. And then you start to add some kids in the equation, and now they start to be able to help with the different chores around the farm. So you could directly see how the increase in your population, you can get exponentially amounts more things done, right? So, so like you're saying, shifting away from that and into more of an industrialized society where everybody has, the division of labor and specialization, and people are very, very specialized in the industrialized societies, that you start to lose that need for having more kids. And then you've now shifted your ability to produce off on other people, which is kind of nice, so you don't have to worry about all that stuff all the time to survive. But since your focus has shifted away from that, now you're doing other, aspects of work in society to earn the money to live. And that makes it so that you're dependent on that currency system. And if the currency system is being manipulated and your value in your currency is becoming less and less, your purchasing power keeps being eroded by the printing of money, then it discourages the people from having children, right? Because it would be difficult to raise a child, having to input those resources when they keep, you keep losing those resources over time because of the devaluation of the currency. So you have to figure out other methods.
Yeah, absolutely. Another topic that Greg pointed out, and I think it's really important, is health issues and environmental toxins. I thought this was a great call out. And, my buddy Dave introduced me to the term SAD, Standard American Diet. And, we know about the problems with ultra processed foods. And some of us know about the problems with plants, vegetables, fruits, grains. The carbohydrates causes glycation in the body, and our governments have been pushing this crazy food pyramid, right? So we're creating autoimmune disorders within our own bodies because of government control, right? And and then the other aspect, which I appreciate Greg pointing this out, are environmental toxins. There are a slew of different things. One thing I've only just started to kind of learn about in the past 5 years are plastics, microplastics, nanoplastics, how they've infiltrated our bodies, and they're causing an increase, and this is particularly bad for the males, an increase in estrogen-like molecules in the body, which causes problems with our testosterone estrogen balance. So that can create, unfortunately, a feminization of men. and that's an issue, right? Because maybe there are issues with fertility at that point, so there are not as many children being created, or maybe men are not as energetic, and when I say energetic, I mean literally energetic. They don't have the energy to engage in work that they normally would have been able to a century ago. So I think just those two are pretty significant.
Yeah, that's the heavy factor in fertility now, and that coupled with the whole cultural thing of people wanting to wait till they're older to have children, it now becomes more complicated. And when you combine that with all these environmental factors that are affecting fertility, then it's kind of making it more and more difficult for if you want to have children later, it's going to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah, right. And that's a good point. Is if you go back just a century ago, it was not uncommon for people who were 16, 17, 18 years old to have kids. Now, you may be twice that age before a person has their first kid, and that's becoming more common. And for the women, you may not want to hear this, but it's just a medical fact that pregnancy at 35 or older, by medical definition, is geriatric pregnancy. We think geriatric, we're thinking 65, not 35. But geriatric pregnancy is from 35, and there are higher instances of loss of the fetus, higher instances of birth complications at birth, and higher instances of I'll say issues after birth, such as autism. And we've shifted so many things up the age ladder that they've become problems. And that puts more pressure on a family. They may say, well, we had the first kid at 36, and the wife is 40 now. We're just not going to have any more kids. Okay, that's a contributing factor. That's definitely part of it.
And you look at, in popular media, you could kind of see, the example of that in the movie Idiocracy, where
right.
They show, it's a lot of the people that are, all that a lot of the idiots are breeding, and then the people that have the college degrees are like waiting, and then they're like now infertile, and then they're like totally get dominated by
right.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point overall. One area that it's a kind of a little on the personal side, and I think it's something that's not talked about enough in our society, is the breakup of families. And it's probably come in two major areas, is where governments have interfered so much, and they have basically preempted the husband's role, or a potential husband's role, taking him out of the family, and replace that with government welfare.
Yeah.
And we've seen this. We kind of know about it, but it's not always easy to get numbers around this. But that's caused more and more people to have children out of wedlock, and these basically broken families, where divorce has become so prevalent that basically it's a 50-50 chance. It's a flip of the coin that on average 50% of marriages will end in divorce. And the usual numbers are 50, 60, 70 in terms of first marriage, second marriage, third marriage. 60% chance of divorce on the second marriage, 70% chance of divorce on the third marriage. That's not good. These are pretty bad numbers. And when we look at what is the incentive system, there are so many incentives for families, for one spouse to file for divorce and to break up the family, you know. And with the advent of no fault divorce, that basically allows one spouse to collect the cash and prizes, if you will, you know, through alimony and child support, and not be accountable to the other spouse or ex-spouse, if you will, for those payments. And it's incentivized. And on top of that, the state, not all states, but in many states, they're incentivized to create alimony payments and child support payments because they get a percentage of that. And I think that that's a problem that of incentives, if you will, and we're seeing that come out in the numbers.
And it just creates a lot more chaos in society, because when you have, you know, a stable family, people can help each other out, or, you know, I'd say like that's what creates community is families. And when you have, you know, multiple families kind of around each other, you know, everybody kind of gets to know each other. And that when you have, you know, those families are able to shoulder the burden and help out when people are going through hard times. But, you know, when you break up the family, now you get people more dependent on it, an external source for that assistance, that being the government in the form of all these different types of welfare programs. So now people kind of are shifting that responsibility and abdicating that responsibility to the government, which makes, you know, the population, the people less stable, and because they don't have the father and the mother in the household, and you know, just kind of leads toward a more chaotic society.
You know, I want to amplify what you're saying. Hey, Alabama says families don't live close to each other anymore. They're scattered all over the place, and their connections aren't all that good. That's a very good point. We are a very mobile society in the United States, and I knew we were a mobile society, but I didn't know how mobile we were until I started getting some feedback from people from other countries who live in the United States, and they're just blown away. You know, for them to move from one part of the country to another part, let's say from you know, the eastern part of England to the western part of England, that's a significant move. My parents and I moved from New Jersey to Seattle. I went first; they came years later, and then I moved, and eventually my parents moved from Seattle to here in Alabama. That's 3,000 miles. Both those, one was about 2,700 miles, the other was 3,000 miles. That's significant. Not just a different region of the country, but one could argue a completely different region of the continent, but also a completely different culture, you know. And that I didn't.
That's not the norm. Well, I don't know. I mean,
the point is, yes, I'm a little bit outside the norm, but
yeah,
we have the capability. And if I tell people I moved from Seattle, like, oh, that's interesting, you know, they'll say, oh, what'd you think of Seattle? Or what are the comparisons that you see? But it doesn't really raise any eyebrows, you know, to do that, because we are a very mobile society, and we go where the work is many times, right? And why did you move? Was it for work? That's the assumption, you know. It's either going to be for work or for family, you know, and that is pretty normal. Whereas in other countries, they pretty much stick where they were born. And I didn't understand that until I started listening to other people talk about it. Yeah, there you go. Hey, Alabama, graduate college, you get a job 2 or 3 states away. Absolutely. I will tell you now, as you point out, Greg, I'm a little bit outside the norm. I ended up living out of a suitcase for a couple of years because I was working for Tyco or Tycom, and it was an undersea fiber optics company. It was for work, and that's kind of what the job demanded. Yes, it's outside the norm, but I met plenty of people, not just in the telecommunications industry, but other industries like consulting, where totally normal. You may go to a client's location for several months, and you're basically living there.
Yeah, I think that kind of it does, like what Hey Alabama was saying, is that so everybody is kind of lost their connections, and it may that might be a contributing factor to how a lot of folks in the country are kind of not very unified on a lot of things, right? Because it's like we're so divided on all these different things, and having your family and like a common culture together kind of unifies you more, with a sense of place as well. And we kind of have lost that in the country because it I think kind of because we are so mobile, right? They're so mobile and individualistic. Like you could be in one state for a little while, and you make some connections there, but then you're gone in like 4 or 5 years, and then you kind of like you might keep some connections there, but now you're starting all over in a new place. So you kind of like don't get rooted in that area, and you're kind of moving in and out of different cultures and stuff. So it kind of keeps people from unifying in a certain region.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of saw this in looking into some of the stuff that was going on with all the Somalians moving into Minnesota. It's like they all have like kind of a common, they have a common culture together, and they're really unified in the things that they don't want people to kind of disrupt their culture that they got going on over there, but they're not assimilating to the United States culture at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is kind of a thing for having community and having like a culture together to become stronger through that.
Yeah. So another area of interference, government interference, that I've been looking into for probably close to 25 years now. It's building up in intensity in terms of my research and views, is basically the way I'll say the social engineering that government has been imposing upon us, and that's basically the creation of the idea that men and women are interchangeable, if you will, and the interchangeability of sexes, or the sexes are the same, and this, out of that has come the idea that societal roles are invoked or imposed, and they're not evolved. So this idea, and we've heard this so much from one political party, of how would I say this? There are you have your role. Your role has been assigned to you, and it has nothing to do with a person's capabilities, if you will. So men are the leaders not because of natural capability, but because they've been assigned as leaders, if you will. And women were the stay-at-home sex, not because they are very well suited to have natural strengths, but because that's just how society told them they ought to be. And I think that so many people have bought into this idea that roles are assigned and not or they're invoked and not evolved. That we have a lot of have a lot of problems within our society, and that's caused a lot of friction between the sexes.
Yeah.
And there are, I think, many men who have taken on a very feminine role in their lives, and many women who've taken on very masculine roles in their lives because they have been told that they need to do so. And it's, I think we're facing some real friction between the sexes, and they're not creating as many relationships as they normally would have in the past. And this is something that's been brewing for the past 5 or 6 decades, and we're really starting to see the problem, the implications of that with the demographics, the numbers. People are just not having as many kids because they're just not getting together,
forming those relationships in the long-lasting, healthy relationships.
Yep, absolutely. And other things that have been an outcropping of this idea that the sexes are interchangeable are the Duluth model, which is basically, I think that was a city in Minnesota, I think it was, where the idea is that women should be promoted at the expense of men, and the government resources should be used to promote that idea, or to promote that agenda, if you will. Other things would be red flag laws, where these are if one spouse accuses the other spouse of something, then police can have that second spouse removed from the household. They can have their firearms removed, and these are all violations of Fourth Amendment rights. And so that's a huge problem. So now, right off the bat, nuclear families are being broken up, and men are basically gun shy. They're starting to realize, okay, these red flag laws exist. I've seen this happen with other people, and now I'm not going to put myself in a position of risk. I'm just going to avoid these situations overall, and government has basically cleaved any sort of potential relationships at all, but because of fear. And whether you want to call it fear or risk mitigation, the effect is still the same. People are just not having kids.
Yeah, and I think it kind of gets into the territory with men, where you can kind of go and get blackpilled about the whole relationship thing and become an incel and say that, like, well, I'm just giving up on it entirely. And I think that can get kind of dangerous, where I think you just have to focus. I think it's more important for men and younger men to focus on a purpose and finding a purpose and deriving something to become competent at and work toward that. And I think I know I could, in my personal life, that I can see that if you get into a relationship with a woman and you start making the woman the focus and not focusing on your purpose, I think that can kind of mess up the relationship, because you're not really, as a man, you're not really displaying your competence and confidence. And I think the dynamics between men and women, like, you really need to find your stability in yourself as a man, and display that for your partner, your female, your woman, and be a really solid foundation for that in the relationship. And so I think it's important for men to focus on building something in their lives, and in finding a purpose. I think that was one of the big things that I wanted to mention in here.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think that too many men have become detoured, if you will. They've become derailed in being productive individuals, and being, I know this is thrown around a lot, but being a little stoic, of being led astray by their emotions too often, and not focusing on a good career, being able to plant the seeds of today that will sprout tomorrow, whether it be through a degree or some sort of certification or networking, moving up the rank in maybe the corporate ladder, things like that. And I think it's really easy in today's society to become derailed by that sort of thing. Another, I'll call it kind of roughly a set of factors, would be, I'll say, birth control, ubiquitously available birth control, no fault divorce, and then the free love movement and the hookup culture. I think in those three or four things together, those have caused huge problems. And I could even add mobility. We talked about mobility a few minutes ago to this mix. And, years ago, people would basically, they would link up with, get married to the people in their town or maybe even their county, because that's about as far as you could physically travel, right? So it was limited by the energy, the second law of thermodynamics, if you will. Now it's I could get on a plane right now and I could go to, Abu Dhabi. I could go to Dubai, right? It would not be difficult to do that. And that mobility, it has freed us in many ways, but it's also had some real serious implications. And the hookup culture is kind of a part and parcel of that. That we can get together and have a whole slew of basic sexual interactions with each other, and there's no commitment behind that. In fact, it creates the antithesis of commitment, right? It's like anti-commitment at that point. And we're seeing more and more evidence to show that when women have a greater number of premarital sexual partners, the rates of marital satisfaction goes down significantly. It's a huge issue. I don't know if we can pull up the graph on this, but I'll see if I can find this.
I have one that we pulled up a while back.
So I put a link in the private chat. I hope that gives us the graph. But this is significant. And when a woman has zero premarital sexual partners, or her premarital sexual partner is the one she marries, the rate of there we go. Thank you. The rate of marital satisfaction is very high. It's around 80%. Just going from 0 to 1, and that one is a person who she didn't marry, drops from 80% to almost 54%, right? And you can see as the number of sexual partners increases from 0 up to as many as 20, the rate of marital satisfaction completely inverts. It went from 80% satisfied, 20% unsatisfied, to 20% unsatisfied. 20% satisfied, 80% unsatisfied. That's a complete inversion of the model, And I think hookup culture has played a huge role in this. I think that there are psychological and physiological effects that happen to women, and this is significant. And these are the sorts of things that are not being talked about. I can put some more links in the private chat, Greg, if you want, for the show notes.
Yeah, because I was wondering about this study specifically on how they collected that data and what all they, all all the numbers and how they did the study and everything.
Yeah, it goes back a ways. I think when Teachman did this, I think this is back in the 90s. I could be wrong, late 90s. I put some other links in the chat for us. And I think, if I can find this. Oh, here we go. So what I'm going to put in here is the original study. It's cedar.wwu.edu. And this is significant. You know, so yeah, there you go. And can you see what year? Okay, so 2010.
2010.
Yeah, so my mistake. Oh, okay, so now I see where I got the 90s. Was in the study, the author uses 25 years of data. Yeah, okay. So these are longitudinal studies. They go back a ways. And, you know, I'm sure there are as many ways to interpret the data as there are people who look at the data, right? But I can't help but think that this is a significant factor for this whole thing, right? In terms of demographics. And the United States is not alone in this. There are huge swaths of the global population that are like that. Europe is in a similar situation. There are parts of Asia that are becoming like this as well. And we're starting to see the effects of, you know, the summer of love, right? Was that, I think, 1969 with Woodstock. That's coming about, and hookup culture. These are important, and these trends unfold over decades, so we don't always see them right before our eyes. It's difficult to grasp that it's happening, and B, the significance of it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it definitely, the dynamics between men and women. It very much seems like in the dating sphere that there are a lot more challenges in the whole, you know, dating and the culture, right? Because of, like you said, the hookup culture, where people can have such easy, you know, women and men have such easy access to all these apps and dating apps and all this stuff, to where you can just strike up, you know, different conversations with people, you know, very easily. And so, you know, it makes it different than how it was back in the day on dating, and there's a lot more access toward different people, different partners than there was in the past. You know, you'd have to go approach, you know, all you had was the approach back in the day on a
Right.
woman that you wanted to go talk to, but now, you know, there's I remember hearing it's like there's a small percentage of the guys that are getting all the women, and then the rest of the dudes are just, you know, trying to figure it out. And so I think that yeah, there's just a lot of challenges there, and for guys to figure out like how to navigate the dating realm when it comes to that, you know, is different than it was back in the day.
Yeah, it really is the Pareto principle writ large, you know, across literally hundreds of millions of people.
80-20.
Yeah. Some would say, you know, to amplify what you're saying, some would say 20% of the guys are getting 80% of the connections. If you will. Now, I'm using sanitary language right now.
Yeah.
Another area, and this is, some people may consider this to be controversial, what I'm about to talk about, but if if one does a search on the Brave search engine, does sperm change the female body? The Brave search engine actually has a pretty good summary on this, and there are websites that go into this in more detail. But yeah, they talk about genetic and molecular changes with gene expression and human relevance. So seminal fluid proteins such as the sex peptide in fruit flies acts as a master regulator that alters gene expression in females. These changes affect fertility, immunity, feeding behavior, sleep patterns, and receptivity to mating. And there's another aspect of this called pair bonding, and it's not just for Homo sapiens, it's for a variety of animals. And this would be regards to a woman who's, when she has sex with a man, her ability to create this really intense emotional connection to the man happens not because of anything that she's intellectually doing, but it goes down to the molecular and genetic level. And for the first man who basically creates that intense pairing with her, that pair bonding, that is the most intense. And then if she has more sexual partners over time, the pair bonding effect goes down greatly with each one. So, if I could reference that Teachman graph, the Teachman heritage study graph before, that is basically an expression of the pair bonding effect, and its diminution over every sexual partner that she has. And every one of these male sexual partners is imprinting on the female and reducing her ability to pair bond, and reducing her ability to receive emotional satisfaction from the relationship, whatever the relationship is, And so this is not a societal invoking of some standard. This gets down to the genetic and epigenetic expression of genes. And this is significant. And we're just now starting to kind of understand how male sperm is affecting female's body. And by the way, it doesn't go the other way, right? And that's not good or bad. It doesn't go from female to male. It only goes from male to female.
Okay, so yeah, that's interesting.
So hookup culture is causing, these problems. Is basically acting like a forest fire, if you will, burning out women's ability to pair bond.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty shocking there.
Yeah. Some people would say it's controversial. I don't know.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that before, actually.
Yeah, look, I recommend everyone look up the concept of pair bonding. That is significant, and that's one of the factors that keeps families together for the long term.
Those chemicals that are released on pair bonding. That
yep, oxytocin, right? That's significant. A woman's ability to release oxytocin from sexual activity greatly diminishes with with more partners who she's had. That's significant.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does kind of like, because I've been watching some of these dating guys and talking about all the women that they've dated, and that some of the things that they've relayed is talking about how that in a lot of the women, that they're not like, when you're in a dating scenario, it's all about it keeps referencing hypergamy, which is like a woman's preference, like you're the best selection that she has currently.
Yep.
And then so that changes your dynamic with the woman, and certain signals can signal to her, to the woman, that you're the best selection, when you could be just a total piece of shit. And it's still giving her the signals that you're a good mate selection.
That's right.
And so for guys that, are wanting to be, that, I think it's probably a good idea to be aware of that dynamic. And like I said, it's it's probably the best that you get out there and you date and you figure it out. You figure out what's going on. And but you should be focused on your purpose and building yourself. And I think you don't get good at something until you put in the repetitions, right? It's like how you master something. So you do need to get the repetitions in.
Yeah. For the audience, a little bit of insight for the audience. Greg and I were talking about this, prepping a couple days ago, and there was the question. We said jokingly, why do women, fall for the a-holes? And I think it gets back to what you said, Greg, in terms of what are the things that trigger the sexes, right? What are they looking for? And I think Rollo Tomasi talks about this really well. He addresses this really well in his program on YouTube and his book, The Rational Male. Actually, the Rational Male series. And on average, it's not 100%, but on average, women are looking for the 3 Ps: provisioning, protection, and parental investment. And they need to look for the characteristics of the men that will help them secure those 3 Ps. And men who are able to be rogues, men who are able to act independently, who don't go with the crowd, who aren't swayed easily, and they're not so easily fooled or emotionally taken over. Those are desirable characteristics from a woman's point of view, understandably so, from an evolutionary point of view. And so I think there's a conflation sometimes of, this guy who's a jerk displays characteristics of independence, not emotionally swayed. I can't get one over on him. And so women are understandably attracted to that type of guy. It fits within the evolutionary biological standard, and evolutionary psychology, has a huge play in this. And for some guys, they may get really frustrated. Oh, why is she falling for this a-hole? Because he has the characteristics that she's looking for, and she may not even know it.
Right. Yeah, that's why I said it's like, for me, haven't had a whole ton of dating experience or relationship experience, but when I look back at some things and I look at the relationships I have been in, and I can see where, spending not focusing on the things that would build that confidence and competence in myself, and focusing too much on the woman in the relationship ends up, when you don't have your clear purpose and direction figured out, how is that going to make the woman in the relationship kind of has to take over this leadership role at that point, because you're kind of off base and you're not having a clear direction. So that just throws the woman off, and then you start to lose respect, and then you're not displaying those characteristics, right? And so I think if you're a good guy, like, you need to focus on that purpose and drive towards that purpose, and not put, make that your focus. And then, your state of being solid internally, right? That gets reflected with the woman that you're going to attract.
Yeah. Hey, Alabama has a comment here. Don't date anyone you wouldn't marry. I think it's wise advice. Absolutely. I think what we're seeing over the past 5 or 6 decades are people who are dating unintentionally, or they're dating without intention. They're dating just to date. And so that's really the antithesis of what you're saying, Alabama. Because I think we're saying this smart. You want to do that. I think hookup culture has really promoted the opposite, the antithesis of that idea. Is relationships are transactional, relationships are temporary. They're you're meant to get what you need, in the moment or at the time, and then move on, and just trade up whatever you feel is up, for the trade, and I think that's and that's not just a U.S. phenomenon. That's we're seeing that around the world. There's something else that you said, Alabama. Find someone like-minded and has similar goals for the future. I'm going to push back on that a little bit. That sounds good in theory, but I think a guy could find a woman who meets the criteria for a family, the criteria for being supportive, and it still won't matter because our modern culture has created two things. Number one, single women keep each other single. That there are so many women who are quite happy to convince each other, I don't need no man, or your marriage is holding you back. And then also our legal system, especially family law, family courts, have made divorce not only acceptable but quite attractive. Through no-fault divorce, it promotes people looking for cash and prizes, if you will, and there is little in the way of negative impact for getting divorced. And for some people, it's actually a positive incentive to get a divorce because of the way our court system is set up, specifically family courts, family law. So you can find someone who is like-minded and has similar goals. Doesn't matter. There are enough cultural and societal effects that can completely neutralize that.
Yeah. And we're coming up on a couple hours here, Jay. It's like we want to work on wrapping this thing up on this.
Yeah, so Greg and I were talking about this. As we got more and more into it, we realized maybe we need to make this a two-parter as well. So we hope that today's episode was really about defining demographics, looking at the population pyramid, defining the population pyramid, looking at factors for why the population pyramid may go pear-shaped, if you will. And then we haven't even said if it's necessarily bad or necessarily good. I think and Greg, I hope I'm representing our conversation accurately, is for the next episode, we'll focus on what's the actual problem. So are these new demographics, are they a bad thing? I think I have my opinion. I think Greg and we agree. But then what's the actual problem? Are the numbers the problem, or the effects the problem, right? Are there solutions to the actual problem? And what would be major future factors? So, we talked about AI, robotics, extracting more energy from the planet, and then health and longevity. And we even looked at the possibility of meaningful metrics, because Greg, you brought up a good point in terms of like, well, how are these countries, how do they come up with these numbers, right? So I think that's a great question. And then out of those numbers, can we develop meaningful measures of success, if you will. So I think those are the things that we want to focus on the next episode, because I appreciate what you said, Greg, in terms of you didn't realize how big it was, and I'm still learning a ton about this. So I hope that we are at least able to provide enough breadth and about 1 inch of depth, at least to make people aware of what's going on.
It's a big issue, and what this all means for the future and where things are going. And I think we're gonna have to dive into it a little bit more on our next stream to kind of get down in the weeds a little bit more, especially when it comes to seeking some solutions. But I did kind of find this kind of funny. Like I kind of wanted to show this little skit by Leonardo Joni to kind of close us out here.
Excellent.
Because it kind of goes along with whatever we're talking about here, and a little bit of a sneak peek for where I think the solutions may lie in the future.
Is weak and gay. Even your enemies are weak and gay. Basically, this woman, Sia Weaver, she's supposed to be an advocate for tennis, sure. She gets confronted outside of her home and asked, oh, since you said all this stuff about taking away white home ownership, does that include your mother's $1.6 million house? Then she starts crying like a goblin. Can you imagine the Bolsheviks being confronted about their hypocrisy and then crying like this? They're looking on her and going, what a weak gay. You got to ask the question and you're going to cry. How are you going to carry out the mass executions that are necessary for your plan if you can't even handle being questioned about why your mom owns a house? See, so our enemies are also weak and gay. So this should make you take heart, right? Because you might look around at your siblings or your fellow Americans and go, God, how are we ever going to win? Everyone's so weak, fake, and gay. But then you have to go look at the other side and go, oh, they're also weak, fake, and gay. So this is going to be a homosexual World War III, and whoever's the least weak, fake, and gay is going to win. You just have to be less weak, fake, and gay than whatever this is. Everyone.
She's great.
What a little really foreshadowing there.
Yeah, she's what I really like about her as a comedian is she has great social commentary, and I think that's a tradition going back to court jesters, right? Is the court jester can say things that nobody else can say, and they're expected to be funny about it, and it's not only acceptable, it's expected of the court jester to kind of add a little levity to the situation.
Yep. So you just got to be less weak, fake, and gay going into the future. We'll leave it at that for now.
That's a good way to leave it. I like why you did that.
All right. So Jay, where could people check you out and everything that you got going on?
Well, as people can see in the Chiron, I run a meetup called Bitcoin, Huntsville, Crypto, and Coffee with my co-organizers and co-hosts, Andy and Justin. We want to help people understand what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it's so important, not just for you as individuals, but what I consider to be the cause for liberty. I call it the ultimate freedom accelerator because it is there to separate state from the money supply. And so many, in my humble opinion, about 95% of the problems that we're facing on the planet, or even the United States, are because of the fact that the United States government, the federal government, has control on the money supply. Their ability to print money ad hoc, ad nauseum, ad infinitum is a problem, and they're bankrupting us. They're bankrupting our values. They're bankrupting our families, and I think the only way that we can fix this is to fix the money, and the only way to do that is to use Bitcoin. It's going to take time for that to happen, and I'm trying to do it one person at a time.
Excellent, man. Well, Jay, I appreciate you as always, man. It's always great to have a conversation with you and dive into these topics together. And so, guys, if you like this, subscribe to the channel, give us a like, give us a comment there on the video. What do you guys think about the demographics and what's going on with the population? And give us your take, and what your insights might be on this, and maybe where we could strengthen up the argument, and maybe some potential solutions. So, well, thank you guys, and we'll catch you guys next time for another Truth Seeking Thursday.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll be off next week, but we'll be back the following week. So we'll see you then. Peace.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.